Featuring a $100,000 prize pool, the Logitech McLaren G Challenge has returned to Forza Motorsport 2023 for its third season. The competition saw thousands of players compete across North America, Europe, Latin America, and Asia Pacific. To qualify for the LMGC, players participated in 3 different rival qualifier events, which took place from November 2024 to February 2025, with the top 10 players in each region progressing through to the semifinals for a total of 40 players in each region. As already mentioned, those regions consisted of North America, Europe, Latin America, and Asia Pacific. I partook in the first rival qualifier back in November 2024, which consisted of the 1976 McLaren M23 at Catalunya. I finished the event in the top 5 in North America with a 1:37.929 as my fastest lap time. This saw me through to the online multiplayer semifinals, which took place on March 1st, 2025. In this video, I'll be sharing my experience with racing in the North America semifinals, as well as the grand final. Before getting into it, it should be noted that of that $100,000 prize pool, $40,000 of it was in cash spread across the 4 different regions. Each region received a cash pool of $10,000, which was distributed between the final 16 competitors in each region. Anyway, I hope you all enjoy and stick to the end. So, jumping straight into qualifying, I was initially feeling pretty good. Unfortunately, despite that good feeling, I was also battling immense nerves at the same time, so trying to focus and set a fast lap time was incredibly difficult when my heart was racing at 1,000,000 miles per hour. As anyone who's participated in events of this caliber knows, the pressure is insurmountable when there's potential for money to be earned. In the LMGC, the cash prizes are reserved purely for the grand final, and with this being the semifinal, if you don't finish within the top 8 to get that ticket to the grand final, you walk away with nothing, and all those hours of practice were a total waste. For context, in this semifinal, there were 2 lobbies of 10 players, and it was the top 8 in each lobby that progressed through to the grand final for a total of 16. On paper, finishing 8th out of 10 players sounds pretty easy, but when you're up against some of the fastest players in North America, that 8th place finish becomes a drastically more challenging task. Anyway, this first race is in the 1976 McLaren M23, and let me tell you, this car is absolutely horrible to drive. You have to utilize a dumb Forza trick known as handbraking, which is when you lightly tap the handbrake through each corner to get extra rotation out of the car. I dislike this mechanic, but in this car, it's unavoidable, and nothing I did tuning-wise eliminated the need to handbrake. It's incredibly annoying, but in competitions like these, being able to adapt is extremely important. On that note, as we go through these last few corners and approach the end of this qualifying lap, I ended the qualifying session with a 1:40.831, which put me 8th out of 10 heading into race 1. I need top 8 to move through to the grand final, so this is a good start. All I need to do is maintain that ace spot, but doing so is way easier said than done. Once again, we're starting this first race in 8th place out of 10 players, and my goal is to just hold on to that 8th spot. As we head into the first corner, I brace for impact, as, well, even in esports competitions like this, people still try to make dumb moves through turn 1. Thankfully, everyone remained fairly clean. It's a tight battle between myself, Blazion, Legacy, and several other players, and I could undoubtedly feel my heart rate rising. I've done a countless number of competitive Forza races over the last 7 years, and those stomach-churning jitters at the start of a race never fail to show up. Thankfully, as the race progresses, my nerves subside and I'm able to focus on driving. Heading into this race, I had done all my practice in single-player time attack sessions, and unlike in solo time attack sessions where I can always take the optimal line, when you're racing with other people on the track, taking the optimal line isn't always possible. I had to adapt on the fly, and this was quite challenging as, again, I went into this race without doing any practice with other players on the track. Anyway, as we head into the midsection of this lap, I'm losing ground to 5th place and above and really starting to feel the pressure from 6th place. I tried my absolute best to defend the position, but Legacy was faster than me around this car and track combination, so it was a losing battle. It also wasn't helpful that F1 cars have always been one of my weak points in Forza. Regardless, I wasn't going to just hand it over to Legacy. If he wanted to pass me, he was going to have to work for it, and work for it he did. He kept applying the pressure until he was able to make a nice move up the inside through turn 10 at the end of the second lap. From this point, Legacy continued to pull further and further ahead, and I settled into P6. We're now going to fast forward to the end of lap 3, as nothing meaningful happened after Legacy passed me. Heading into the end of lap 3, Ascari is inching closer and closer with every passing corner, and again, I try my best to hold him off, but I was really struggling in this car, so I knew it was only a matter of time before he passed me. I'm now in P7, but I'm also feeling the pressure from P8, and maintaining my composure was becoming significantly more difficult. We'll pull away from P8 at the start of lap 4 thanks to the low aero setting I was running, but with low aero, it meant I couldn't take the corners as efficiently, so once again, Zach was right on my tail. It was a three-way battle between myself, Zach, and Zeno, and holding onto that ace spot was becoming harder and harder. Zach and Zeno went up my inside and made the pass, but I wasn't trailing far behind. Heading into the midsection of the lap, it's once again a three-way battle between myself, Zach, and Zeno, and my heart felt like it was going to beat itself out of my chest. The nerves were extremely high, but I did my best to stay calm and collected. Derluki tried to make a move up the inside through corner 7, but he cooked it too much and compromised his speed through sections 8 and 9. Luckily for him, he was able to make it stick, but now he was feeling the pressure from Zeno. It was now a battle between myself and Zach for P9, with myself dropping down to P10. Unfortunately, going through corners 11 and 12, Zach and I made contact, and Zach lost control. I felt bad for the situation, as I should have given Zach more room, but it's easier to say this looking back than being in the heat of the moment. There were no hard feelings between myself and Zach. Anyway, cutting to the end of lap 10, P9 is where I would stay for the rest of the race, and heading into race 2, I was one position away from qualifying for the grand final. In order to make up for my 9th place finish in race 1, I would need a 7th place finish in race 2 and race 3. I was really feeling the pressure. Now, here we are in race 2, and the second race is in the 1988 McLaren MP4. Unfortunately, I immediately shot myself in the foot as I went into this qualifying session and forgot to change my tires and fuel load. For reference, I was running lap times in the mid to low 134 mark in my solo practice sessions, but because I went into the qualifying session with max fuel and medium grip tires, I lost several seconds a lap and only clocked in a 143.227 as my fastest time. As a result of this, I started race 2 in dead last. It was off to a terrible start, and my hope of making it through to the grand final was rapidly diminishing. If I wasn't able to turn things around, my hopes for the grand final would be over, and all those hours upon hours of practice would have been wasted for nothing. Anyway, at the start of this race 2, the grid slowly pulls away, but I'm trailing not far behind. I go too hot into corner 3 and bump into Derluki and Zach, but I let off and let them get resituated. I then resettle into last place, and at this point, I wasn't very happy. It felt like the race ended for me before it even started due to my catastrophic fumble in the qualifying session. Whatever the case, I stayed close behind, so the race wasn't over yet. As long as I could just stay focused and not make any fatal errors, I could regain ground and once again be in contention for the grand final. Zach goes wide out of corner 9, and I was able to capitalize on that mistake and gain some ground heading into corners 12, 13, and 14. Unfortunately, I messed up my exit out of corner 13, so Zach pulled away again and things weren't looking good for me. Thankfully, I regained ground through corner 15 and ended up right on Zach's bumper through corners 16 and 17, but I took too much curb, and once again, Zach pulled away. In a desperate attempt to regain ground as I enter the second lap, I go full send through corner 3, but all this did was cost me time as I went too deep and screwed up my line through corners 4 and 5. We're now going to fast forward a bit, and through corners 6 and 7, I was finally starting to gain some ground. Zach made a fatal mistake and was sucked off by the sand, which, while bad for him, it was good for me. This is where I stayed for the rest of the lap, so we're now going to fast forward to lap 3, where I finally start to gain ground under Derluki and Zeno. The two were battling ahead of me, and as a result, I was able to capitalize on that battle and close the gap. Exiting corner 5, I was right on Zeno's tail, and I was determined to make the pass, which I successfully executed through the beginning of corner 6. My attention was now on Derluki, but Zeno was following close behind, so I had to keep that in mind as well. Luckily, exiting corner 8, the gap between myself and Zeno was growing, and my hope for the grand final was slowly re-emerging. I went full send through corner 9 and gained significant ground on Derluki heading into corner 10, and through corners 11, 12, 13, and 14, I kept it tight and controlled, and gained even more ground on Derluki heading into the start of the long straight into corner 15. I kept applying the pressure, and Derluki was definitely feeling it. I was trailing close behind Erluki through corners 16, 17, and 18, and unlike the previous lap, I didn't bounce off the sausage curbs and cost myself significant ground. Things were looking better, but I still had work to do. Now, fast forwarding a little bit, we're now side by side going through corner 4, but I hit his rear bumper and it threw my car off. As a result, Erluki was able to regain ground exiting corner 5. Fortunately, I had regained that ground by the time turn 6 came, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the opportunity for a pass would present itself. Fast forwarding to corner 13, Erluki makes a critical mistake and goes wide and allows me to gain significant ground on him. Heading down the long straight, myself and Erluki are now neck and neck, and I was finally able to make the pass through corner 15. I was now up to P7, which, once again, is where I needed to be after my 9th place finish in race 1. If I could just hold on to 7th place, I would be back in contention for the grand final. Anyway, Erluki gains ground on me through corner 17, but I stay calm and collected and held firm in that 7th spot heading into lap 5. It remained close between myself and Erluki through corners 1 and 2, with us making contact again through corner 3. Finally, through corner 4, I was able to pull away and just focus on driving. I extended this gap through corners 6 and 7, and this is where I stayed for the remainder of the race. Cutting to the end of lap 10, I grew my lead over 8th place by 5.1 seconds, and I crossed the finish line in P7. I was now back in contention for the grand final. I was feeling much better going into race 3, especially as race 3 was the car and track combination I was the most comfortable with. As we head into race 3, I jumped straight into the qualifying session, and unlike in race 2, I remembered to adjust my fuel load this time. In solo practice, I was averaging mid-144s around this combination, which consists of the 2013 McLaren P1 GTR at Watkins Glen. I ended the qualifying session with a 145.613, which while that wasn't very fast, it was good enough to put me in P7 at the start of this third race. As long as I could maintain that 7th position, I would make it through to the grand final and be a part of the final 16 out of the more than 40,000 people who competed in North America across all 3 rival qualifier events. Anyway, heading into corner 1, I make brief contact with Blazion, but it wasn't anything too severe. Myself and Blazion are side by side at the beginning of this challenging S's section, but he and I make contact once again, and I'm sent sideways. Fortunately, I was able to recover and continue on. Anyhow, as a result of this collision, Zeno pulls ahead, and I find myself in 8th place. Not for long, though, as Whiteout and Blazion make contact, and I was able to pull ahead back into P7. Heading down the back straight, I was gaining on Blazion, but I let off as going side by side through the bus stop would have been a death sentence for both of us. I settle into P7, with 8th place following closely behind. I pulled away from Whiteout heading into corner 6, but I took a horrible line and bounced off the inside curb. As a result, I lost speed, and Whiteout was able to regain ground on me. I was still in 7th though, and that's all that mattered. I held strong through corner 7, but if I lost the 7th spot, my odds of making it through to the grand final were slim, so I was fighting as hard as I could to ensure I didn't fall any lower. Myself and Whiteout were nearly tied going into corner 8, but I had the advantage as I was on the outside, which put me on the optimal line for the following corner. Myself and Whiteout make contact, but we stay on the track, and heading into corner 9, I was just able to narrowly hold on to my lead. I was being closely followed, though, so it wasn't time to celebrate yet. Whiteout tried to go up the inside through corner 10, but I was able to close the gap before he had the opportunity. I held strong onto that 7th position exiting the final corner, and heading into lap 2, this is where things went downhill for me. I went too far on the inside through the first corner, and as a consequence, it unsettled my car and cost me speed going into the fast S's section. Whiteout continued to apply the pressure, but I was holding firm going into the back straight. Unfortunately, I screwed up my line going through the bus stop, so Whiteout gained significant ground on me and was looking to make that pass. I continued to hold on to P7 though, and I actually gained some ground exiting corner 5 and into corner 6. That didn't last though, as I braked too late into corner 6 and went wide, which significantly slowed me down and allowed Whiteout to catch right back up. At this point, the nerves were running so high I was beginning to get a stress headache, which only made it even more difficult to concentrate. Regardless, I continued to defend 7th place through corner 7, and I know Whiteout was dying to make the pass. Up ahead, an incident occurred between Blazion and Zeno, which gave me a shot at the top 5. Unfortunately, that wouldn't come into fruition as Blazion got crazy speed exiting corner 9. It was now a 4-way battle between myself, Whiteout, Zeno, and Blazion. Whiteout moved up the inside through corner 10, and sadly for me, I was too narrow going through corner 11, so I hit the inside curb and lost significant speed. As a consequence, I fell down to 8th place. I was freaking out, as if I dropped any further, that would be my shot at the grand final out the window. Zach and Derluki were following close behind, with Zach making the pass through corner 1. I was now down to 9th place, and my hopes for a spot in the grand final were, once again, dwindling. Heading into the S's section, I lost major ground to Zach as I had to let off, otherwise I would have understeered off the track. Luckily for me, Zach and Zeno got into a minor collision at the end of the S's, which allowed me to catch back up. Sadly, I tapped Zeno's rear bumper, which slowed me down and allowed Derluki to speed past. I was now in dead last, and my odds of making it through to the grand final were as low as it could get. Fortunately, at Derluki's demise after cooking it too hard through the bus stop, I worked my way back to P9 and I wasn't far from Zach and Zeno. There was still hope. I gained ground through corner 6 and didn't go too narrow this time, but Zach got a really good exit, so I still found myself losing ground. The gap stayed fairly consistent through corner 7, and by the time corner 8 came, the gap between myself and Zach was shrinking. Through corner 10, Zach lost traction, which allowed me to get right on his rear bumper, and I was applying the pressure as hard as I could. Unfortunately, that came at my demise as I hit the sidewall and destroyed my run down the start-finish straight. With lap 4 on its way, I regained ground through corner 1, but I was still stuck in P9 and I had to do something fast as the race was nearly at its halfway point. I once again gained ground on Zach through the S's and down the back straight, but I braked too early through the bus stop and the gap between myself and Zach widened once again. In addition to that, I was hit with a half a second penalty, which was absolutely bogus as I definitely didn't gain half a second worth of time. So now, not only did I have to pass Zach, but I had to make sure I was at least half a second ahead of him to counteract the penalty deficit. I gained some time through corner 6, but it wasn't enough to really make a meaningful impact. Nothing much happened from this point, so we're now going to fast forward to lap 5. Going through the bus stop, Zach locked up his brakes and was sent wide, and at his detriment, I was able to benefit and move back into 8th place. I was gaining ground on Zeno as well, and at this point, making it through to the grand final was on the table again. The work wasn't done though, as it was only lap 5, and a lot could happen in the remaining half of this race. I messed up corner 6, but I was able to recover without too much consequence. I held firm through corner 7, but Zeno was gradually pulling away. Fast forwarding a little bit, Zeno goes wide through turn 10, and I was able to catch up, but that was followed by me going too narrow and bouncing off the inside curb through corner 11, which drastically slowed me down, and Zeno was able to regain his lead. Not only that, but Zach repassed me, and once again, I found myself in P9 with my hopes at the grand final being shot down. Fortunately, unlike the previous lap, I took a much faster line through corner 1, which allowed me to regain ground on Zach and Zeno. The race was now past its halfway point, so I had to do something fast to get things turned around. So, I risked it through the S's section and sent it as hard as I could. It wasn't pretty, but I managed to make it stick, and that was me once again back into 8th place. I held firm through the bus stop, and now my sights were on passing Zeno. Now, with Zeno being 1.2 seconds ahead of me, this would be no easy task. Anyway, nothing happened the rest of lap 6, so we'll be fast forwarding to lap 7. Once again, I find myself gaining ground through the bus stop due to someone else's error, and that someone else being Zeno. I could taste 7th place, and at this point I was now pushing as hard as I could to regain that 7th spot. I had spent too much time getting to this point to finish one position away from having a spot in the grand final. I was not going to let this become a reality, so I continued pushing as hard as I could possibly push. After messing up corner 6 and losing ground to Zeno, my hopes were once again fading, but I wasn't going to give up. Nothing else substantial happened in lap 7, so we'll be fast forwarding to lap 9. History repeated itself once again, and going through the bus stop, Zeno cooked it too much and ruined his line, which allowed me to make the pass I had been dying to make for the last several laps. I was now back up to P7, which is where I needed to be to get that grand final ticket. It wasn't over yet, though, as I still had to hold on to P7 for another lap and a half. My anxiety was through the roof, but I stayed cool to the best of my ability. I continued to hold strong through corner 7, and that's it for lap 9. Cutting to the end of lap 10, I held on to that 7th spot and crossed the line with my ticket to the grand final. It was very rough, but all that matters is that I got through. That sweet relief at the end was euphoric. My back was drenched in sweat, and I was in major need of a good shower. But I got through, and that's all that matters. After just narrowly making it through to the grand final, it's now the big day itself, and going into it, I was feeling alright. I have always struggled with F1 cars in Forza, so I knew it would be a challenge, but I didn't let that discourage me. In the days leading up to the grand final, I experimented with my tune, and I found that running max aero shaved almost half a second off my lap times. As a result, I went from doing 138.9s to 138.5s in my independent practice sessions. Anyway, here we are in the qualifying session for race 1 of the grand final, and unfortunately, I only managed a 139.819 as my fastest qualifying time. It was disappointing as, again, I was doing 138.5s in my independent practice sessions, but in a live setting with stakes on the line, the pressure is much greater. I also didn't want to push too hard and risk invalidating the lap by going off the track, so I drove more conservatively. As a consequence of this, I started race 1 in 13th out of 16. So, to say the very least, it wasn't off to a great start for me. Anyway, here we are at the start of race 1, and going into the first corner, another player made contact with TNR Banana and sent him sideways. While unfortunate for him, I benefited from his misfortune and moved up to P12. It wasn't over yet though, as I was surrounded by several other players. Unfortunately, Zeno turned into me, but the good news was that I got out of that incident rather unscathed. My goal for this grand final was to finish within the top 10, so I still had my work cut out to get that top 10 finish. Nothing much happens after this, so we'll be fast forwarding to corner 8, where Fear the Gecko goes too wide and gets sucked off by the sand. As a result of his mistake, I moved up to 11th place, and now I just needed one position more to get that top 10 finish I was after. Unfortunately, with 10th place being a second ahead of me, my hopes for the top 10 were diminishing. Cutting to lap 2, 10th place continued to expand the gap between he and I, and 12th place was in my draft and rapidly gaining. Banana made the pass through corner 1, but I wasn't going to give it up just yet. Heading into corner 4, Banana went too deep, and as a result, I moved back into 11th place. At this point, I knew 10th place was out of the question, so my focus now was to just defend P11 and not drop any further. Things settled down at this point, so we'll be fast forwarding to lap 6. Once again, here we are going into corner 4, and Banana managed to recover from his mistake and shorten the gap to just 3/10. Banana had been slowly gaining on me the last few laps, and he was determined to make the pass. I wasn't going to give it up easily though. We were neck and neck through corner 5, but I got a better exit, and once again widened the gap heading into corner 6 and 7. Cutting to corner 13, Banana was once again right on my tail, and I knew it was only a matter of time before he went for the pass. I did not at all feel comfortable with this car and track combination, so I was just trying my best to defend and not drop too far down the grid. Anyway, Banana made the pass going down the start-finish straight, and that was myself once again in P12. Banana took a horrible line going into corner 1, and as a result, I capitalized on that mistake and moved back into 11th place. He was still on my bumper though, so the fight wasn't over yet. Cutting to corner 11, myself and Banana were pretty much tied, but he had the inside line and moved back into P12. I was following close though, and I tried to make a move through corner 12, but we made contact and I let off, as I didn't want to cause a race-ending accident for the both of us. Banana pulled away, and that was me in 12th place. From this point, it stayed stagnant until lap 8. Going through corners 7 and 8, Banana took too much curb and was sent flying off the track. Due to his fumble, that was myself back in 11th place. Banana quickly recovered from his mistake, so while I moved up, I had only grown the gap to just a little over half a second, which meant I was at risk of Banana getting in my draft and skyrocketing past. Fortunately, by the start-finish straight, I had grown the gap to about a second, and as a result, the draft was no longer a concern. Anyhow, cutting to the end of lap 9, Banana was once again right on my rear bumper, and I was trying as hard as I could to defend my position. I extended the gap exiting corner 14, but it wasn't over yet. Banana got in my draft and flew past me heading into corner 1, and from there, he continued to pull ahead. I ended race 1 in 12th out of 16, and this was the outcome I predicted with how much I struggled with this combination. Still though, it was disappointing to not get that top 10 finish like I wanted. It was also frustrating, as if I hadn't fumbled the qualifying session so bad, a top 10 finish would have been 100% within reason. Here we are in the qualifying session for race 2, and unlike in the semifinals, I remembered to change my tire compound and fuel load this time. My tune already felt pretty good, so I didn't make any changes going from the semifinals to the grand final. Unfortunately, you also have to abuse the handbrake in this car, like the M23, but the good news is that the handbrake is only required through corner 4 and corner 6, unlike the M23 Catalunya combo, where you have to handbrake through nearly every corner. Anyway, I ran my fastest qualifying time during my third qualifying lap, and I crossed the line with a 1:35.516 as my fastest time. It wasn't very fast, but it was 8 seconds faster than my qualifying time in the semifinals, so it was a huge improvement. I started race 2 in 11th out of 16, so while not amazing, it was off to a better start than race 1. I also felt more comfortable around this combination than the previous, so I was feeling way more confident going into this race. Anyhow, at the beginning of this first lap, I didn't get the greatest launch, but I was still close to the pack ahead going into corners 3 and 4. I went up the inside and moved up to P10, but I was being hounded by the cars behind me, so it was far from over. Exiting corner 5, 9th and above pulled away, and Banana and Wankan went up my inside going into corner 6. As a result, I dropped to 13th, but it was still early in the race, so I had plenty of time to recover and make up ground. Deerplot was dying to make the pass through corner 7, but I held onto it and remained in P12. Through corner 9, I gained on Wengan and pulled further ahead of Deerplot, so I was slowly but surely recovering. I didn't want to send it too hard through corners 11, 12, and 13 and risk causing an accident between myself and Wengan, so I backed off and took it cautiously. Wengan pulled away, and Zeno passed Deerplot and had his sights on passing me next. Deerplot repassed Zeno going through corner 15, and I was slowly inching closer to Wangan. I was right on Wangan's rear bumper heading into corner 16, but I touched the sausage curb through corner 17, and Wangan pulled away. Now, in lap 2, I gained significant ground on Wangan through corners 1 and 2, and I knew my chance to make the pass would soon present itself. Unfortunately, I messed up corner 4, which allowed Wangan to pull away and let Deerplot catch back up. Due to this, Deerplot passed me going into the straight into corner 6, and that was myself down to 13th place. I stayed close through corners 6 and 7, but Deerplot got a better exit and extended the gap. Deerplot messed up corner 9 though, which allowed me to shrink the gap and be right on his tail going into corners 11, 12, 13, and 14. Myself and Deerplot were tied going down the straight leading into corner 15, but I was way too cautious, and Deerplot went flying past. That was myself once again in 13th place. Cutting to corner 7 lap 3, I drastically shrunk the gap between myself and Wangan, and regaining 12th place was in sight. I got even closer going into the corners 11 through 14 complex, and initially, Wangan pulled away, but he went too hot exiting corner 13, and that allowed me the opportunity to catch up and make the pass down the straight into corner 15. Being over a second off P11 at this point, I knew my odds of moving further up the grid were slim, so now the name of the game was to hold on to P12 and not drop any further. Wangan tried to go for a move through corner 16, but I closed the gap before he had his chance. He was on my tail, but the good news was that I extended the gap exiting corner 18 heading into lap 4 of 10. 12th place is where I stayed for the rest of the race, so we'll be cutting to the end of lap 10 as nothing else exciting happened from here on out. I crossed the line in P12, and honestly, I was quite disappointed I once again missed out on the top 10. My biggest problem at this point was that I kept screwing up the qualifying sessions, which put me at a bad start in the races, and I was never able to recover. After a stressful first couple of races, we're now in the qualifying session of the third race, and I didn't waste any time. I went straight into the qualifying session, and I once again remembered to change my fuel load. After my race 2 qualifying fumble in the semifinals, I was extra diligent to ensure I never made that mistake again. I ran my fastest time of this qualifying session in lap 3 of 4, and I crossed the line with a 1:45.702. I was pretty disappointed by this, especially considering I was a 10th up in the last split sector of lap 4. Unfortunately, my car got caught on an invisible object, which destroyed my speed and ruined the lap. I was incredibly confused by this, as there definitely wasn't anything there, but my car was driving like there was a cone or something stuck under one of my tires. It's like the game was purposely trying to sabotage my qualifying session. As a result of this, I started race 3 in 11th out of 16, like I did in the previous race. It was disappointing, but it wasn't over yet. Like the last race, I didn't get the greatest launch off the line, which allowed Wangan to immediately make the pass into P11 going into corner 1. I settled into P12, but not for long though, as chaos ensued down the long straight going into the bus stop chicane. Wangan braked too early, and as a result, Zeno went flying into the back of him. Unfortunately, I had nowhere to go as I was caught in the middle of it, so I unavoidably sent Wangan off the track as he was sent sideways. It was incredibly messy, but that's how it goes down sometimes. There was nothing I could have done in this situation, and ultimately, it would have been avoided if Wangan hadn't braked so early. Anyway, I shortened the gap between myself and Deerplot going through corner 7, and getting that top 10 finish was within reach. I got even closer through corner 8, and at this point, the pressure was immense given the money up for grabs. I didn't let that weigh me down too much though, as I continued to focus on the task at hand. Deerplot pulled away a bit, but nothing else worth noting happened after this until corner 7, lap 2. Deerplot pulled away in the preceding corners, but I ran a good line through corner 7 and slowly shrunk the gap between myself and Deerplot until he pulled away again. It was frustrating, as I was so close to that coveted 10th position I was chasing, but I wasn't quite close enough to actually go for it. Cutting to lap 3, corner 7, a battle was ensuing ahead between Deerplot, Blazion, and Bowtie, which allowed me to catch up, and just like that, the top 10 was once again within reach. Exiting corner 7, Blazion was sucked off by the grass, which allowed me to inch even closer heading into corner 8. Blazion turned too early and went into Deerplot's side, which messed up Blazion's line and sent him wide. As a result, it was a three-way battle between myself, Blazion, and Deerplot for P9. Blazion moved back into P12 through corner 9, and myself and Deerplot were neck and neck. The two pulled away through corner 10, but I was trailing not far behind. I was so close to the top 10, and I wanted it so badly. Unfortunately, I messed up my line through corners 3 and 4, which allowed the two ahead of me to pull away down the long straight into the bus stop chicane. This was so disappointing, as I was so close to the top 10, and that one mistake destroyed all my hope of the top 10 becoming a reality. From this point, the gap stayed fairly consistent until the end of lap 4, where Blazion and Deerplot continued to expand the gap between them and myself. With the race being halfway over, I was accepting the reality of the situation that, unless either of them made a critical mistake, my chances for a top 10 finish were long gone. Regardless, I continued to focus on driving to the best of my ability while under the immense pressure I was feeling. By lap 10, the gap between myself and the top 10 grew to 2.5 seconds down the long straight into the chicane, but my only remaining sliver of hope was that Blazion had a 1.8 second penalty, which meant if I could get within 1.7 seconds of Blazion, I would move up to P10 after penalty deductions. Unfortunately, this meant I had to somehow gain 8 tenths on him, and gaining 8 tenths in the last lap is highly unlikely unless Blazion made a catastrophic error. In the end, this didn't come into fruition, and I ended the last race in 11th out of 16. With all that said and done, I finished the grand final with a cumulative ranking of 11th out of 16 across all 3 races, and as a result, I'm walking away from the grand final with an extra $200 to my name. Earning money from gaming is something I could have only dreamed of 16 years ago as a little 8-year-old boy, so while I'm thrilled to have walked away with any amount of money, I would be lying if I said I wasn't a little disappointed in knowing if I had finished just one position higher, I would have won an additional $50 and walked away away with $250. Still though, I now have an extra $200 I can put into the S&P 500, and I earned it doing something I love. However, I also can't help but feel disappointed, as a top 10 finish was 100% within reach if things had gone a bit more in my favor. Now, with that in mind, I'm a perfectionist, so regardless of where I finish or how I perform, I'm never satisfied, as there's always room to grow and do better. This is now my third time participating in the McLaren G Challenge, and I treat these competitions as a personal milestone to track how I improve over time. 1 year ago during Season 1, I went into the Grand Final in 15th out of 16 and finished in P12, and fast forward to today, I qualified 14th out of 16 and finished the Grand Final in 11th. I also think this set of competitors was much more challenging than last year, so not only did I finish a tad higher, but I did so against harder competitors. In my opinion, the car and track combinations were also much more difficult this time around. I didn't do as good as I did in Season 2, as I qualified 14th out of 16 and finished the Grand Final in 9th, but 11th isn't too far off that, and I also found the combinations in Season 2 to be much easier for me. Another thing to note was that the prize pool was smaller in Season 2 than in Seasons 1 and 3, so even though I finished 2 positions higher, I only walked away with a $100 winning rather than the $200 winnings I earned from Seasons 1 and 3. Anyway, a massive thanks to Logitech for running these events, as now with the Forza RC being permanently buried 6 feet under, these LMGC competitions have filled the void that was created when the Forza RC was shut down in 2019. Whatever the case, the LMGC has now taken the Forza RC's place, and I'm looking forward to Season 4. Thank you all for watching, and please consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment down below.